Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something huge in AI, the black box problem. I mean, we see these incredible models like GPT-4 doing amazing things. Text, images, speech.
Yeah, absolutely staggering. Some are estimated to have trillions of parameters now. It's mind-boggling stuff.
But that's just it, right? The sheer scale, the complexity, it's kind of outrun our understanding of how they actually work inside.
Exactly. And that's a serious issue. Transparency, trust, especially when AI is making decisions in, say, healthcare or finance, you really need to know why it's doing what it's doing.
That really gets to the heart of it.
Right.
And we have explainable AI, XAI tools, but they often have this gap, don't they?
They do. Many popular methods like SHA, which is great, mostly focus on the inputs, which words in a prompt led to this text or which pixels were key for classifying an image.
Right. But what if you want to know about the machinery inside? Like in a stable diffusion model generating an image, how does this specific neuron affect that specific pixel over there?
Yeah, that level of internal detail is often missing. And that's precisely the gap that this research by Sri Dixit and colleagues is aiming to fill with something called Multiperturbation Shapley-value Analysis, or MSA.
MSA.
Think of it as a more powerful kind of X-ray for the AI's brain. It's a framework. It doesn't really care what kind of model it is.
Model-agnostic.
Exactly, model-agnostic. And its job is to figure out what each individual component inside the network is contributing. Not just to the final output score, but to, like, every pixel or every word.
Okay, this sounds powerful. So our mission for this deep dive is clear. Let's unpack MSA. How does it work? Why is it different? And maybe most importantly, what surprising things has it shown us already?
Sounds like a plan. It's definitely revealed some counterintuitive things.
Right. Let's get into the core idea then, this game-theoretic framework. You mentioned Shapley values from the 50s.
That's right, Lloyd Shapley. Game theory. The core concept is actually quite elegant if you think about it. Imagine all the little components inside the neural network, the neurons, maybe filters in a CNN or these experts in newer models.
Okay, the building blocks.
Yeah, treat them like players in a team, a cooperative game. And the team's goal is to produce the model's output, maybe high accuracy or a really good image. That's the value of the game.
So the network's output is the team score.
Exactly. And the Shapley value is a mathematically fair way to divide the credit for that final score among all the players based on their marginal contributions. It looks at every possible subgroup or coalition of players to figure out how much value each one adds on average.
Okay, that analogy helps. So how does MSA actually calculate this contribution for each player, each neural unit? It can't just ask them, right?
No, not quite. The core mechanism is pretty clever. It systematically lesions units.
Lesions, like damages them.
Well, more like temporarily deactivates them, takes them out of the game for a moment. It does this for different combinations of units. Sometimes one unit is out, sometimes group, sometimes almost all of them.
Okay.
And for each combination, it measures how the model's output changes. The Shapley value for a specific unit is then its average contribution calculated across all these different scenarios, all these different teams it could be part of. It's very thorough.
That sounds computationally intensive, but thorough, yeah. But what about those complex outputs? Images with millions of pixels or long sequences of text. How does it assign value there?
That's where one of MSA's really unique contributions comes in. Shapley modes.
Shapley modes.
Instead of just a single number representing contribution, a Shapley mode is a map. It has the exact same dimensions as the model's output. So if the output is a 124 by 124 image,
the Shapley mode for one neuron is also a 1 in 24 by 124 map.
Precisely. And that map shows you, pixel by pixel, how much that single neuron influenced each part of the final image. Same idea for language. You can see how a neuron contributes to each specific token in the output sequence.
Wow. Okay. That pixel level, token level insight feels like a game changer compared to just input attribution.
Yeah.
What else makes MSA stand out?
Well, besides being model agnostic, which is a big plus, it gives you both local explanations, like for one specific image, and global explanations, looking at the overall contribution across many outputs.
Right.
And crucially, it's designed to quantify causal unit interactions. It's not just about what one unit does in isolation, but how units working together cause certain outcomes. That's a deeper level of understanding than many other methods like layer-wise relevance propagation or integrated gradients typically provide directly.
Okay, interactions too, but you mentioned computation. Doing this for all combinations sounds impossible, factorial growth and all that.
You're absolutely right. Calculating it exhaustively is usually intractable for any non-trivial network. So MSA uses Monte Carlo estimation. Yeah, basically smart sampling. It doesn't check every single possible combination or ordering of units. It samples a representative subset. It turns out you can get very accurate estimates this way without the insane computational cost. Think of it like a political poll. You don't need to ask everyone to get a good idea.
That makes sense. And is this something researchers can actually use?
Definitely. It's available as an open source Python package, MSAPI, so people can download it and apply it to their own model.
Practical, open source, powerful. Okay, the proof is in the pudding, right? Let's talk about what MSA actually found when they pointed it at different networks. Starting with something fundamental, the multi-layer perceptron, the MLP.
Right, a classic. They trained a simple 3-layer MLP on the MNeist dataset handwritten digits. Everyone knows that one.
Yep.
They played around with the number of neurons in the hidden layer from just 5 up to 200, and they tried 3 different types of regularization, L1, L2, and none at all. All these different setups got pretty good accuracy, over 90%.
Okay, standard setup. But the findings about regularization, that was pretty eye-opening, wasn't it? It wasn't just about neatness.
Not at all. It fundamentally changed how the network distributed its work. MSA showed that regularization, especially L1, forces the computation into just a few hub neurons.
Hubs?
Yeah. Get this. In a regularized network with 200 neurons, if you took out just the top 40 most important neurons identified by MSA, the accuracy plummeted basically down to random chance.
Wow, just 40 neurons knocked it out.
But in the unregularized network, taking out the top 40 only dropped the accuracy to about 50%.
So the unregularized one could still function somehow.
Exactly. It shows that without regularization, the network naturally spreads the functions out more evenly across the neurons. It's more distributed, more robust to losing individual components in a way.
That is fascinating. So regularization makes it lean, maybe efficient in one sense, but also more brittle. While the unregularized one is messier, but more resilient.
That's a good way to put it. It challenges the simple idea that fewer active parts is always better. Sometimes redundancy or distribution is strength.
How did they measure this distribution formally?
They developed a metric called the Index of Distributed Computation, or just D. It's based on entropy, ranges from 0 to 1. Higher D means the work is spread out more evenly, like everyone on the team doing a bit.
Okay.
And they found that regularized networks actually showed a bigger drop in D as you added more neurons. It's like even with more resources, the regularization forced them to keep using just a few key players. The unregularized networks kept a higher D value. They just naturally used the extra neurons to spread the load.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, this next finding really blew my mind. The idea that neuron weight, how big the connection strength is, doesn't always equal importance.
Yeah. This one really goes against common intuition. We often assume neurons with big weights are the important ones.
Right. It seems logical.
But MSA found that in unregularized networks that were just big enough to do the job well, what they called minimally sufficient, around 50 neurons for MNeist, there was almost zero correlation between a neuron's weight magnitude and its actual contribution calculated by MSA.
Zero correlation. So a neuron could have a tiny weight but be super important, or a huge weight and be less critical.
Exactly. In those specific conditions, the correlation did appear if the network was much bigger than needed or if regularization was applied.
Why then?
Well, regularization actively tries to push small weights to 0, right? So it kind of isolates the important neurons by shrinking the weights of less critical ones. And if the network is way too big, maybe some neurons just naturally end up with bigger weights, even if others are also contributing significantly in a distributed way. But in that sweet spot, unregularized, just big enough weight isn't a good guide to importance at all.
That's a really important nuance for anyone trying to interpret or prune networks based on weights alone.
Absolutely. You might be throwing out crucial low-weight neurons.
MSA didn't just look at individual neurons, right? It could also say something about the tasks themselves.
Yes, it could quantify things like functional complexity. For instance, classifying the digit 9, which has complex curves, showed the highest D value it needed more neurons working together in a distributed way.
Compared to
digit 1, just a straight line, that had the lowest D value, the simplest task computationally.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. And similarity between tasks.
Yeah, interclass similarity. Digits that look similar, like 4 and 9, show the strongest correlation in which neurons were important for classifying them. They were essentially reusing the same internal machinery more often.
And you could see this having applications beyond MNeist, right?
Yeah.
Like in speech or language.
For sure. Imagine analyzing phonemes in speech. Which ones are more complex? Which ones rely on similar neural processing? MSA could give you that map. That could be useful for speech therapy, linguistics, understanding how language is processed in the brain or in AI.
Okay, from the foundational MLP, let's jump to the other end of the scale. Massive models. You applied MSA to Mixtral-8x7B.
Well, the researchers did, yes. Mixtral-8x7B, a huge mixture of experts model. 56 billion parameters.
Mixture of experts, right. So it has these modules, these experts inside.
Exactly. 32 layers. And each layer has 8 specialized experts. So 256 experts in total. It's designed so that for any given input, only a couple of experts per layer are actually activated.
Okay. And MSA was used to figure out what each of those 256 experts was contributing.
Precisely. Across different tasks, factual recall, arithmetic, language identification, without any fine-tuning, just looking at the base model.
And it found layers specializing.
Very clearly. The early layers seemed pretty general purpose, important across the board, but then things diverged.
How so?
For factual knowledge tasks, like what's the capital of France? The first and last layers did most of the heavy lifting. The middle layers, surprisingly little contribution.
Weird. What about math?
Arithmetic, like complex multiplication, heavily relied on the middle layers. That's where the complex reasoning seemed to happen.
And language tasks.
Kind of a mix. Early layers were important, then moderate contribution from the middle. So different task types definitely engage different parts of the network depth.
So the layers have roles. What about the experts within those layers? Generalists versus specialists.
Similar pattern. Experts in the early layers tended to be generalists. Their contribution patterns were highly correlated across different tasks. They were doing fundamental processing.
Right.
But experts in the later layers became much more domain-specific. They specialized. An expert important for arithmetic might not be important at all for factual recall later in the network.
A hierarchy of specialization.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But then there was that one really standout expert.
Ah, yes. Expert 3 in layer 0, the very first layer. This one expert was found to be highly contributing across all the different task domains they tested.
The MVP expert.
Pretty much. And here's the kicker. They tried removing all the other 7 experts in that first layer, leaving only expert 3.
Yeah. Performance barely dropped. But if they removed only expert 3 and left the others, accuracy tanked by about 16%.
Whoa. So that one expert was doing almost all the essential work in that layer, and the others were redundant.
It certainly points to a high degree of redundancy, at least for those tasks, and a crucial role for that one expert. It makes you wonder about the routing mechanism that decides which expert to use.
Yeah, is it efficient? Does it always pick the best one?
Yeah.
They looked into redundancy more, right? Especially with math problems.
They did, using the GSM-8K dataset, which is math word problems, and found some really interesting, almost paradoxical things.
Like what?
First, they removed the lowest contributing expert for that task, and guess what? Model accuracy actually went up slightly.
It got better. How?
The hypothesis is that maybe the routing mechanism sometimes sends inputs to less than ideal experts, and this particular low contributing expert might have actually been slightly detrimental. Removing it improved the average outcome.
That's wild. So pruning isn't just about removing dead weight. It might remove slightly negative weight sometimes. Potentially, yes. And they tested robustness further. They removed up to 70 experts. That's over a quarter of all the experts in the model.
Okay, that must have destroyed performance.
Only dropped accuracy by 14%.
Only 14% after removing 70 experts. That's incredible resilience.
Massive redundancy, right. The model could compensate surprisingly well for losing many low-impact experts.
But, and this is the crucial contrast.
The contrast is stark. Removing just one really high-contributing expert had about the same negative impact as removing those 70 low-contributing ones.
Yeah.
And if they removed the top 40 experts, accuracy went to 0. Game over for the math problems. It highlights just how critical those top players are, even amidst widespread redundancy.
Incredible. Okay, one more case study, and this one is visually fascinating. Generative networks. Using MSA to look inside a GAN, creating faces.
Yeah, they applied it to a DC-GAN, a deep convolutional GAN, trained on the Celeba dataset of celebrity faces. A bit simpler than the massive models, but perfect for seeing how MSA works on image generation.
And again, it found something totally backwards from what we might expect based on classification networks.
Completely inverted, actually. In classification CNNs, the early layers detect simple things like edges and textures, and later layers build up complex objects, right?
Right. Simple to complex.
With the generative GAN, MSA showed the opposite. Filters in the first layers contributed most to high-level features like the overall shape of the face, the general structure.
Starting abstractly.
Exactly. And then the later layers progressively added finer details, textures, edges, specific features, and finally, the RGB color values in the very last layer.
So generation is like starting with a blurry concept and gradually bringing it into focus layer by layer.
That's a great way to visualize it, a hierarchical synthesis process from abstract to concrete.
An MSA could pinpoint filters for specific things like hair or teeth.
Yep. It identified clusters of filters associated with different attributes, and they could test this by lesioning them.
What happened?
If they removed the filter cluster MSA linked to brown hair, the GANs started generating faces with blonde hair. Remove the blonde cluster, you get brunette hair. It showed the network had learned to segregate those features.
Okay, that's cool. What about something like a smile?
This showed the GAN's adaptability, likely from its adversarial training. They found the cluster for generating teeth in open-mouthed smiles. When they removed that cluster...
Did it make weird gums?
No, it adapted. It started generating realistic closed-lip smiles instead. It found a plausible alternative that didn't require the missing teeth component.
That's really clever behavior, almost like problem solving.
Yeah.
But there have to be limits, right?
There are. And MSA helped find them. They tried removing the clusters for both eyes and teeth.
Okay, what happened then?
It still managed the closed lip smile, adapting for the lack of teeth. But for the eyes, it just produced an unrealistic, dark, poorly defined shape where the eyes should be.
So it couldn't adapt for the eyes?
Apparently not. Eyes are maybe too complex, too fundamental to the concept of a face, and there wasn't a simple alternative like a closed mouth for missing teeth. It pushed the network beyond its ability to realistically compensate. It just filled the space.
That really illustrates the power and the limitations of that adaptive capability. Okay, wrapping this all up, it seems clear MSA is filling a really important gap in XAI.
I think so. It gives us a principled, flexible way to look inside the models, beyond just correlating inputs and outputs, and quantify the contributions of the internal units themselves.
And that understanding isn't just academic, right? It has real potential for building better AI.
Absolutely. Interpreting models, debugging them, finding redundancies for compression or potential vulnerabilities, maybe even editing model behavior by targeting specific units identified by MSA. It opens up a lot of practical possibilities.
Now, it's not perfect. You mentioned it can be computationally heavy.
It can be, yeah. Nearly 9 days for the Mixtral analysis on a hefty GPU. It's a significant cost. So future work is definitely looking at faster ways to estimate the Shapley values, maybe more sophisticated sampling.
And it tells you what a unit does, but not necessarily how it does it.
That's another key point. MSA quantifies contribution and interaction, but understanding the specific algorithm or mechanism or neuron or filter implements, that's still a deeper level of analysis that often requires other methods or further investigation.
And what about looking beyond single units?
The framework has potential there too. The researchers mentioned extending it to analyze interactions between pairs or even larger groups of neurons more directly, which could give an even richer picture of the collaborative computation happening inside.
This has been fascinating. MSA really does seem like a powerful new lens, moving us closer to genuinely understanding, not just using, these incredibly complex AI systems. It feels like knowing these internal contributions is the first step towards real model editing and optimization.
It's a significant step towards demystifying the black box, for sure, moving from just observing behavior to understanding the internal mechanics.
Which leads to a final thought.
Yeah.
If we can get truly precise about which parts of an AI do what, pinpointing the math experts or the hair color filters, how does that change things? How might it alter how we design AI, how we fix it when it goes wrong, or even how we interact with it? Could that lead to genuinely new kinds of AI capabilities or systems we can finally trust more deeply?